BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
This podcast contains adult themes, very strong language, and language that may offend.
Its basic premise was, again in my view, and I believe the view of many commentators, that it is impossible for black and white to live in harmony.
No.
This was the basic premise.
No. I said that this is a matter of number. Now that I do believe.
November 1968. On BBC television, Enoch Powell, the
basic
Conservative
views.
politician, is appearing on Week In, Week Out. About 6 months ago, he made a speech in Birmingham, England, that would come to define his political career. This now infamous speech led to Powell's sacking as Shadow Defence Secretary, with street demonstrations both against and in support of his stance. As controversial as his views were, they proved to be popular, adding credibility to what many also felt.
Of course, you can introduce a small number of people, even of very alien culture and habits, etc., into a community, particularly a tolerant community like that of these islands, with success. But that if those numbers increase, and if the prospect of their further increasing becomes evident, then indeed you run into the dangers which arise out of any invasion of a society.
But what evidence did you produce in the speech? What evidence did you produce to back up this contention that there was a danger in increasing numbers of immigrants coming in? May I suggest to you what your evidence was? It was a letter written by an old lady which complained about wide-eyed, grinning pickaninnies. It was the remarks made to you by a disgruntled constituent who said that in 15 years' time, the black man would have the whip hand over the white man. There was no other evidence at all.
I see. And was it not evidence that when I had spoken, the vast majority of people said, yes, he's right, that's what we think?
But do you still
Nothing
see
else.
the River Tiber foaming with blood, Mr. Powell?
Does anybody doubt that there would be a danger of bloodshed if a proportion of unassimilated immigrants in this country, in concentrated areas of this country, were to rise at the rate which I have repeatedly argued it is rational to assume it will, unless corrective policies are applied? I thought this was common ground.
Wide-eyed, grinning pickaninnies, rivers of blood, the whip hand over the white man. All these terms serve to inflame the general public, drawing national attention, debate and division. Aided by his political experience, Powell avoided any criminal prosecutions by attributing the words to his constituents. He was merely relaying the worries of his fellow Englishmen. Michael Abdul-Malik at the time of Powell's speech was languishing in prison for making similar inflammatory comments, but with much less skill and tact. In this episode, we'll see Michael released from prison. The summer of love is over, taking with it the broad optimism of the 60s. Michael has lost that optimism too. He still has big plans, but is embittered and angry. My name is Hamza Salmi, and this is Who Was Michael X? Episode 6, The Black House.
I was shocked by his terminology. I mean, there's rivers of blood. I mean, if we'd used expressions like that in 1968, after passing of the two race bills, in our literature, in our newspaper, then certainly we would have been on a charge. I thought it was a bit strong, but nevertheless I still gave him my support.
That was the late John Bean reflecting on Powell's speech in a BBC documentary. Bean was one of the founders of the NF, the National Front. As a child, I remember seeing the NF logo spray painted on walls around southeast London. It never failed to shatter my sense of security or remind me of the threat of racial attack. I find it surprising that even an NF founder like Bean balked at Powell's words. And I wonder what Michael X was thinking reading Enoch Powell's speech, whilst in prison himself for inciting racial hatred. Here's what an unnamed young black man felt at the time, as broadcast by a TV program called 24 Hours.
The Englishman is a person who doesn't like to come out straight with what he thinks. What he has in his mind, he keeps it in. You see what I mean? And he doesn't say nothing. Mr. Powell, what he has done is to bring it out for the majority of the workers, the ordinary people. and so cause strife. Now, men like Michael de Freitas, exactly what Michael de Freitas has said, it's really equivalent to what Mr. Enoch Powell said. But Mr. Michael de Freitas goes in jail. Now why? There must be a reason. And the only reason that I can see is that one is black and one is white.
During his incarceration, Michael was moved constantly between 5 different prisons. At times, he was placed in solitary confinement for protection. At other times, banished there for punishment. In an article he wrote for Oz magazine, he recalls being moved to Stafford Prison one evening. He was met by a sea of noise. The yells of white inmates who knew he was coming. Racial abuse and threats rang out through the night while he lay in his cell.
Yeah, he was much more militant, and he believed much more in what he was doing. It was no longer a game, I suppose. He really did now think that, this is so outrageous that this is an act that was supposed to defend black people and, from racism. I mean, that he would be one of the very first people to be charged under the Race Relations Act and stuck in jail. So the hypocrisy had really got to him. And I don't think he had a good time in prison either.
As Barry Miles says, Michael left prison more militant than when he went in 9 months earlier. It was now July of 1968. On his release, he gave an interview saying that they had taken 1 year of his life and that he wanted 1 year of theirs, which he would take one way or the other by any means possible. Whilst Michael was inside, much had changed in the outside world. In the States, Martin Luther King and Robert Kennedy had been assassinated. The anti-war hippie Summer of Love had ended. In the UK and Europe, campaign groups were on the rise, and protests and demonstrations were everyday events. Much had changed for Michael too. He had split up with his girlfriend Nancy Bacall before going into jail, and instead started to reconcile his relationship with his wife Desiree. When he left prison, it was Desiree waiting for him outside the gates, taking him home to be with their children. Michael was intent on returning to his role in the Black Power movement. A number of organisations had appeared in Britain: the Universal Coloured People's Association, the British Black Panther movement, created by Obi Ogbonna, inspired by the wildly successful American Black Panthers, and in August 1968, a new organisation emerged called the Black Eagles. This was set up by Darcus Howe, a man who would later become an outspoken broadcaster, writer, and black activist. Unlike Michael, he had a very good education and had trained as a barrister, but Darcus was unemployed at this time and had nowhere to stay, so Michael put him up. The launch of the Black Eagles took place at a benefit evening for Obi Ogbonna, who was in jail. Obi Ogbonna had written an essay about how black people should collectively resist police at Speaker's Corner in Hyde Park. Speaker's Corner was a hotbed of political activism and debate, where new ideas were disseminated. Special Branch had created the Black Desk to closely follow the Black Power movement and used Obi Ogbonna's essay to charge him with conspiring to incite the murder of police officers. The benefit evening for Obi Ogbonna and other incarcerated black activists was held at the familiar Roundhouse in London, hosting celebrities with deep pockets. There was music, performance, and readings from star acts and leaders. After each song or act, a bin bag would be passed around for donations. American singer Sammy Davis Jr. almost took the roof off the building. Sammy had been struggling with his own identity, especially in the wake of the civil rights movement, and whereas once he shied away from his blackness, now he was intent on embracing his colour and advocating the rights of his people.
Having played both sides, been a Negro, and also living in the white world with a white past, more or less, I know that ain't the way to make it. This time, unlike the other 20 times I've been to London, the black people in London are gonna know I'm here, because I'm gonna walk into them joints, man. And some of them I won't be welcome, but I hope by the time I leave, they'll know at least he's honest and he's trying to let us know that he cares about us. I have given well over $1.5 million to civil rights, but it ain't enough. Because when I gave the money, I was trying to buy my blackness. You cannot buy it.
So, once launched, the Black Eagles set itself up a bit like a political party. Darcus appointed himself Prime Minister, and Michael gave weight to the organization by becoming his minister without portfolio. Others were given ministries like transport and finance. They set up street patrols, just like the American Black Panthers had done, to police the police. In October 1968, Darcus and Michael attended the Black Writers' Conference in Montreal, Canada. Here, in the wake of Martin Luther King's assassination, the central subject was the black struggle. There, they reunited with Stokely Carmichael and then headed to America. They connected with various chapters of the Black Panthers and the grandly titled Almighty Black Pea Stone Nation, the Chicago Street Gang. The Black Eagles printed a monthly magazine. One of the editions featured the Eagles' demands. It called for full and fair employment for black people, better housing, education, and an end to police brutality, freedom for all black people in prison, and my personal favorite, that all black people should be tried by their own peer group, as is written in Magna Carta. Edited by Darcus, the magazine also featured Michael's poetry and an account of Michael's home being raided by the police. Another article, called Enoch's Henchman's Strike, described petrol being poured through the letterbox of a Jamaican and set alight. Experiences like this were commonplace following Enoch Powell's Rivers of Blood speech. In an effort to reconnect black people with their heritage, the Black Eagles magazine even had diagrams and instructions on how to make your own dashiki, a colourful shirt emblazoned with African print, and most articles concluded with the words, "Long live the Eagles," in all caps. Unfortunately, the Black Eagles did not last long, a mere 5 months. While in prison, Michael felt betrayed by his white liberal friends, and on his release, cut them loose. To make ends meet, he did what he knew best and returned to hustling with vengeance. Leading a crew, he and his lieutenants robbed other criminals of their drugs and cash. Darcus Howe was one of his lieutenants. But at some point, Darcus decided he'd had enough. Leaving Michael's gang came with a price. Anyone who wanted to do so faced a beating. At this time, Michael was pretty terrifying. He used to walk around with a big sword hidden in a walking stick. He went looking for Darcus, who escaped from a window of his girlfriend's flat, later leaving the country for Trinidad. When he returned in 1970, he joined the British Black Panthers, knowing it would protect him from Michael taking revenge. Maybe Michael's volatility frightened Darcus. Perhaps he wanted to distance himself from the hustle. Either way, Darcus would in later life play down their relationship and any influence that Michael had had.
I have never known Michael to organize a single event or single activity which drew people together to tell them anything. He was never interested in that. I mean, it's quite obvious that Michael had no influence with black people, and he was particularly harmless, in my view. He damaged no cause other than his own.
So, with Darcus gone, the Black Eagles no more, Michael was in need of a new project, and he had a rather ambitious one in mind, called the Black House.
While men watched the cities disintegrating, princesses saw me building our community of new people who once were write-offs in the old world. We toiled with a vigor that made them ask, for what and where are you going, even why? It was late in the year, and their peace feelers were out. But we could not hear. Our hands were full. The only sounds were the hammers and saws of the carpenters. Music, we call it. Bombs fell around us. Those they could gather were thrown in their jails. We went on. They could not tear down our town. Their bombs kept raining, but one building stood. It shone like a light amid the ruins. They could not understand our foundation was solid. It was made of a new material. Idea.
This poem, called One Flower, written by Michael, is about the Black House. I have a photo of it inscribed in black paint on a whitewashed brick wall, the back wall of the Black House. To the right of the poem, in various hands, are graffitied tens of names of people involved in setting up the Black House. They include Michael X, his wife Desiree, his children Michelle, Jenny, Alicia, the activist Roy Saw, comedian Dick Gregory, singer Sammy Davis Jr., and one Nigel Samuel.
Nigel Samuel was the son of a property developer and had a lot of money. He always was very sensitive to the whole business of racism in Britain, probably because he was Jewish. I mean, he did obviously experience some kind of prejudice himself. His mother owned eventually the majority shareholding in the New Statesman, in fact. I mean, so it was kind of a left-wing Jewish intellectual North London sort of family. When we started International Times, we put an ad in saying we needed people to help deliver the paper or street sell it. And one day this Aston Martin draws up outside, and Nigel sort of strolls in, dressed in wonderful velvet and stuff, and offers to do lots of deliveries and stuff for us, which he did. It was great, nothing like having your underground newspaper delivered in an Aston Martin. And then we became really good friends. I saw a lot of him. So one day Nigel was visiting, and then so did Michael come to visit, and so they got on. It was a natural friendship. Nigel was very sensitive to Michael's situation, and they got on very well. And eventually, Nigel financed the Black House.
Nigel's dad, Howard, had been a property developer, but died young in 1961, leaving him as a teenager with a £4 million fortune. Michael befriended Nigel Samuel, and they had a unique relationship. But sadly, Nigel suffered from mental health issues. It appears a kind of manic depression. And Michael was someone who would sit down with him and calm him during his most fitful episodes.
He was just a very loving, caring, honest man. And through the fortunes that he had, he wanted to do good.
This is Louino Samuel, Nigel's daughter. I interviewed her in 2020. And very sadly, she's since passed away.
My dad was a loving, kind soul. And he went through a lot. He lost his dad at 15. He looked after his mother and his sister. And no matter what he did, there was so much money. Our family was so big in those days. They helped in the Labour Party. They've given money to universities, everything.
Nigel's first business dealings with Michael were to buy up all the unsold copies of his autobiography, the sales of which, since his incarceration, had been much lower than hoped. Michael then cooked up a plan to educate Nigel about the realities of racism by planning a world tour, beginning in Trinidad.
May I have your attention for a few moments, please? You may unfasten your seatbelts and smoke if you wish.
Nigel paid for Michael's wife, children, and members of his crew to come too. While they were there, Michael told Nigel about his plans to set up the Black House. He wanted it to be a self-sustaining refuge for black people, providing all sorts of services for the community, such as a supermarket, a restaurant with Caribbean and African food, flats where people could live, a play school, a museum, a library, and a youth centre where young black people could hang out. Nigel was very sympathetic to the black cause and dug very deep into his pockets to pay for a long-term lease on 28,000 square feet of buildings in Islington, North London. It was a warren made up of old dilapidated shops stretching from 95 to 101 on the Holloway Road, in dire need of refurbishment, and Nigel again was happy to help. Despite believing in the cause, there was an alternative motive, as Nigel's daughter Louino explained to me.
It must have been very hard for my dad because he was very young when he lost his father. And it didn't matter what he did, even if people robbed him of his money, there was so much. He didn't really have to work. So that's why he did some of these projects. But it was all for good. He wanted the mix, for the world to be not just whites, all these filthy rich white people. He wanted, all of us to be equal. Didn't matter what colour skin you had. And he loved, I know, I've always known it, my mum told me, my dad, he loved black women.
And Michael provided Nigel with those black women.
I liked the Black House, all right, because I had my own room in the Black House, because I used to go down there to have a meal.
This is Royston Casanova, Michael's stepson, who was close to Michael and would often visit. Michael spared no expense when it came to his large office.
The desk was facing you as you come through the door. Ornaments on the left, ornaments on the right. And it was a big office. Businessman's desk. Heavy.
The Black House became a hub for young people especially. They had a games room, a kitchen for those who couldn't feed themselves, even a rehearsal room for musicians. Michael used his hustling skills and connections to drum up support. Numerous letters went out to celebrities. Muhammad Ali and Sammy Davis Jr. donated, the comedian Dick Gregory, and this man.
Now, Black Power, what was that? We never mentioned the word Black Power. It was just Michael X said, we have this youth club. All the black kids want is just some recognition that somebody has an interest in them from the so-called establishment or the uptown. So he said, just come down and visit with us to show that somebody out of your world is interested in us.
Michael got an appointment to see John Lennon, and according to Michael's biographer, John L. Williams, he berated him for stealing black people's music and commercializing it. Guilt-tripping white liberals was Michael's speciality, and it paid off, as Terry X, one of Michael's followers, recalls.
There was a telephone call that there was something waiting for us somewhere in Greek Street, and me and Michael, we was walking down, and Michael said, I wonder what that could be, and I said, it's either a bag of money or like a bag of dope, and Michael said, I think it's a bag of money, and we went in there and went into that room, and Yoko handed us that brown paper bag, and it was £10,000 in £10 notes.
John Lennon not only gave his money, but even his hair. In a very strange publicity stunt, Michael swapped the bloodstained shorts of Muhammad Ali that had been gifted to him by the champ after the famous fight with Henry Cooper for the newly shorn hair of both John Lennon and Yoko Ono. Royston was there.
Yoko Ono, she was very quiet, actually. She didn't say much about anything up when she came to the Black House. She had a little one or two people, and they was just talking to Michael all the time.
Royston wasn't too impressed with Lennon either.
And I was vexed. I wanted to give him a slap. When he came up to Black House, I went, all right, John. He just looked at me and walked past. And I went, argh. Michael went, don't go off. I walked out. I said, fuck it. Yeah, he was rude. He said to Michael, you get $1 each. But that never materialised.
The $1 each that he's talking about is Michael's plan, which failed miserably, to sell every strand of John and Yoko's hair for £1. To this day, no one knows what's happened to the hair. The Black House played a role in educating black youths about their history. The library contained books about black heritage, and the museum exhibited African artifacts. Guest speakers would come to the house to give talks about politics and African history. In the late 60s and early 70s, before Black History Month was commonplace, the idea of an African connection and a history was radical and enlightening for young black people born and bred in the UK. Michael was rather prescient when it came to education. In an interview, he said that in the future, people like Cecil Rhodes would no longer be considered heroes, but would have to be termed as plunderers. Michael aimed not only to free young black people mentally, but also physically. The Black House also gave classes in self-defense.
I teach my children to fight. This is one of the first lessons I give my children because I feel it is necessary in this world, which is very vicious towards young people, so they may learn how to defend themselves. I teach them how to use wit because inside of this society one has to survive by their wits. If one is black, you got to be twice as good as the next man. So one has to work twice as hard to be that. That's the way the society is. That's a reality. There's no such thing like equal opportunity. That's bullshit. I'm successful because I'm prepared to work twice as hard and I'm prepared to be twice as ruthless as anyone else.
Michael's defiant attitude came to the fore in several incidents with police in 1970. A young black guy was stopped in North London. According to the police, the youth was extremely obstructive. and following a fracas, he was arrested and taken to a nearby police station. Michael promptly went down to demand the boy's release. The police ignored him. So later in the day, Michael returned from the Black House, invading the police station with more than 100 youths. Michael stood across the road as they attacked the station. The standoff lasted until dawn the next day. I think it's fascinating that Special Branch in their files about this event claim a legend of police brutality has been created by Black Power activists to further their cause. They dismissed claims of police brutality and instead cast themselves as victims, describing the actions of the Black Power activists as anti-police brutality. The press reported on this incident, saying that Special Branch and MI5 were reassessing the Black Power threat because of the new tactics being used by people like Michael. The police station attack occurred just a couple of weeks before another major event in Black British history, in which Michael also played a part, the Mangrove Protest. The Mangrove was a Caribbean restaurant in Notting Hill, which was often targeted by the police. Between January 1969 and July 1970, it was raided 12 times, and the clientele routinely harassed. Michael convened a Black Power meeting, bringing together various groups under one roof at the Black House to discuss how to address the issue of police brutality. They also helped plan protests about the Mangrove. On the 9th of August 1970, 150 people marched to the police station in Notting Hill. It became known as the Battle of Portnall Road, as protesters clashed with the police. But despite galvanizing support for the march, Michael was notably absent. Many others were arrested, and 9 would face trial for incitement to riot. The Mangrove 9 included black activist Darcus Howe, the owner of the Mangrove, Frank Critchlow, and Althea Jones-LeConte, the leader of the Black Panthers in the UK. They went on famously to represent themselves at the Old Bailey and were exonerated. But despite all the positive activism and building the ambitious idea of a Black House as a refuge for Black people, Michael couldn't help himself. He turned it into a base for his illegal activities. Here is his business partner, Nigel Samuel.
We did have periods of, perhaps I found it out at the time or latter day, I don't know, but we did have periods of sending people out selling drugs, yes. But you must remember, when you talk about drugs, you must remember the West Indian community is going to find them anyway.
Yeah, sure.
We were only selling them a little cheaper than market price.
Well, where did they usually get the drugs from?
They were hijacked.
Yeah.
Straight hijackings.
Michael was continuing to rob criminals of their cash and drugs. When I spoke to Royston, Michael's stepson, he implied these hijackings had even more dire unintended consequences.
I remember one time, there's a Cockney boy, dressed up sharp, really dressed up nice, really, like a millionaire, just really cool, nice rings. He came up to Black House. He had some drugs to sell from Lebanese, 9 blocks. So anyway, Michael ripped him off. He went back to his mates. 3 days later, the guy that came up to Black House was found floating in the Thames, where his mates bumped him off because his mates thought he done it, Yeah, they killed him, they did, poor bastard.
The police were still watching Michael and had been for many years, and Michael knew it, as Royston recalls.
They had the spies there, there was a garage across the road. They had a camera there. Opposite, Michael just sitting, they're busy today. I said, why is that? He said, they're looking up you too much, the silly bastards. He said, they must think we're daft. I said, why is that? He said, they can't take a camera. They seen who'd been there, and
Not only were they watching who'd been there and who hadn't, they were bugging Michael's phone. So one day he played a trick on the police, ringing someone saying, "Are you going to bring the guns?" Then he waited and watched as the police turned up and found nothing. But it was Michael's greed that really undid the whole project, as Terry X, a follower of Michael, explained in an interview with BBC reporter David Tyndall.
If you made thousands of pounds out of dope in this way, selling it, why wasn't it the Black House succeeded? I mean, where did the money go?
Michael had only one thing in mind, making money, and whatever money came, whenever, like especially when it came in large quantity, he dissolved it into his bank account.
This insidious greed infected his relationship with Nigel too. If he ever felt that Nigel was slipping out of his grasp, he would send a new black woman around. And there was one woman he sent as a deliberate plant, not only to keep him sweet, but to siphon off more funds. Her name was Kathy.
So I was planted in a house with Nigel.
You were?
Yes, to keep an eye on Nigel and to sort of get money to give Michael, or, get Nigel to give him money, in another word. Nice him up.
Did he give any money to you?
Yes, he gave me money, and I gave some money to Michael.
How much is that?
Well, I gave Michael about £75.
Was he satisfied with that?
No, he wasn't. He wanted more.
How much had Nigel given Michael X during the Black Cast period, do you think?
25,000.
How much?
25.
£25,000.
The baby you can hear in the background is Nigel and Kathy's daughter, Lowino.
He fell in love with my mum. My mum was everything to him. And then I came along, but my mum probably wanted me to come along because I was the bargaining tool.
Meanwhile, Michael was becoming more aggressive. He was the king of his castle, and as BBC reporter David Tyndall explains, he was becoming ruthless.
And just how ruthless is well illustrated by an incident at the Commonwealth Caribbean Centre in Victoria Street on Friday the 27th of March 1970. At exactly 9:30 in the evening, he arrived there with a colleague. He told the secretary, who was alone, that they'd ordered £2,000 worth of books. They hadn't been delivered, so they proposed to take them there and then. They picked up a large camel skin bag from a corner and emptied into it 3 shelves of 130 books, valued at £70. When the General Secretary at the centre later protested, he was assaulted.
It's as if Michael felt he was untouchable. And this behavior is evident in one final shocking incident. In April 1970, a black man called Leroy House started work with a cleaning company. There was a disagreement over his pay, and so Leroy complained to Michael. Michael gathered 6 henchmen and went to the offices of the cleaning company, demanding the payment, which was a trivial £3. The owner, a white Jewish man named Marvin Brown, told him he didn't have any money on him. And so Michael stole his business ledgers and told Brown if he wanted them back, he'd have to come to the Black House. Brown went there accompanied by 4 plainclothed police, who were promptly kicked out by Michael as they didn't have a warrant. Brown handed over the £3 and asked for the ledgers. Michael told him to return in half an hour. When he did, he was ushered into the office. Michael reeled off a list of the ways white people degraded black people and asked Brown what he was doing to rectify the situation. Brown countered he was a minority too and had been persecuted as a Jew. A slave collar was produced. It was one of those historical artifacts from the Black House's museum, made of metal with spikes on the inside. It was designed to poke into the neck of whoever wore it. One of Michael's men put it around Brown's neck, and they paraded him around the room in front of 30 people. Brown was in tears, utterly degraded. Michael then made him pay for a signed copy of his autobiography, and then he let him go. The police were outside the whole time, and when they heard what had happened to Brown, they arranged for a warrant, and a week later the Black House was raided, and everybody present at the attack was arrested, including Michael. Michael was charged with robbery and making unwanted demands with menace. A court date was set for the 5th of July, 1971. With all the heat on him, why did Michael jeopardize all that he had built over this petty dispute about £3? Michael was facing a maximum penalty of 14 years. Utterly unwilling to go back inside, he made plans to escape back home to Trinidad.
Now, you see, you're talking of leaving, of going back, perhaps, fairly shortly to Trinidad.
I have grown very fond of my neighborhood, and I would have liked to have lived there in peace and in harmony. I have grown happy with my work, alleviating the frustrations of those who cannot do it for themselves, and I would have loved to have carried on doing that and creating a better world. But I'm afraid it's not to be. And before the Holocaust comes, I wish that as many of our people as is possible would leave and go back to where they may be able to live in harmony and leave England for the English.
In Michael's interview on personal choice, I think you can hear he has grown weary of the struggle. He lists his achievements, but actually at the time the Black House was failing. Reconstruction work incomplete, the supermarket unopened, and one by one his followers fell away and quit. Here is Kathy, Nigel's partner.
They lost faith in Michael in the end. Everybody wanted the Black House to succeed, and it could have succeeded if Michael really wanted to work hard at it. But he was just playing his games, you know.
Why do you think he did that?
Because Michael doesn't believe in black power. Michael is just on a power trip, you know, for his own benefit. Michael doesn't like black people because Michael is half white.
Michael's relationship with Nigel Samuel, his business partner, was also at breaking point. He sent another black woman to demand money. When Nigel refused, she stabbed him. It wasn't life-threatening, but it caused a mental breakdown. Nigel's daughter, Luino.
I don't like him very much. And in some ways, if I look back on it, he caused my dad a lot of hurt and confusion. And he took a lot of money off my dad.
Despite this, Nigel would later defend Michael and insist his relationship with Luino's mum, Kathy, had been above board and was nothing to do with extorting money.
After you'd pulled out of it, did he then try to retain any hold over you by using somebody else or at all, you know?
None whatsoever.
What about the
moral blackmail, nothing.
What about the lady you're living with? I mean, how did the relationship with her start?
She's not connected. She's no connection to it whatsoever.
And then, Michael publicly announced his resignation from the Black Power movement. On the 30th of November 1970 in Oxford, he said Black Power movements were no longer needed, as social evolution has in effect processed the pattern out. This was a huge surprise to the remaining members living in the Black House. Michael handed the keys to one of his loyal followers, a fellow Trinidadian, a man named Stanley Abbott, who will emerge in the next 2 episodes as a key participant, so remember his name. But within 3 weeks of him taking over, the Black House had been looted and it finally closed. And Michael? Well, with the trial looming, he left for Trinidad. Although he claimed he'd be back to face the jury, he'd actually never returned to Britain. However, at this point we need to ask something. How was this prominent man who was under police surveillance allowed to leave the UK while on bail? In all my research speaking to so many people, one rumour keeps appearing. That Michael had some compromising material on a high-ranking member of the royal family. Material that may have stopped the authorities in their tracks. Material that he could use as leverage to get them to leave him alone. Allegedly, these are compromising photos of Princess Margaret. It's another unbelievable twist in the tale. And yet, Royston, Michael's stepson, told me he actually saw them. But are you saying you actually in real life, Michael showed you the photos?
Michael showed me the photos.
Really?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, he showed me the photos. Oh, Margaret. He said, this will make me great. I went, is it? Is it right? I went, oh, yeah.
I have not yet been able to corroborate his story. But if those photos did ever exist, then there are huge implications, leading to all sorts of conspiracy theories about what happened next in Michael's story. In the next episode of Who Was Michael X, Michael and his family make a new start as they set up an idyllic commune in Trinidad. But death is on the horizon.
While troops searched the area, they came across a freshly planted lettuce patch, beneath which was the first of the graves. This was where Joseph Skerritt was buried. 4 days later, mine detectors led them to another grave, and the body of Gail Benson, the daughter of a former Tory MP in London.
Who Was Michael X was presented, written and produced by Hamza Salmi, featuring Peter De Jersey as Michael X, assistant producer Wayland Mackenzie, researcher Palumi Odubanjo, technical producer Michael Millam, theme music by Kyra Nakal, production mentors Claire Walker and Joe Kent, executive producers Kalik Mir and Leanne Ali, commissioned for BBC Sounds Audio Lab by Kalik Mir.